Now, chapter 21 discusses the balance of water, electrolytes like sodium, potassium, chloride, and there's also the balance in the acid and base, being that hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions, and how our body balances all of these different things depending on the needs and depending on the changes of those needs and the changes in input and output of these substances. So the whole concept of balance means that we want to maintain a state of homeostasis, a state of constancy, although the variables are changing all the time. So the amount, for example, the amount of water that we intake varies per day. So does the amount of water output in the form, for example, of the volume of urine. So with all of these things that are changing all the time, how do we maintain a state of constancy, whether it's in relationship to the amount of water that we have in the body, or electrolytes, or the pH levels? And we should know from chapter 20, or the urinary system, that water and electrolyte balance are interdependent. So we've seen how when there is reabsorption of sodium, for example, water always follows by osmosis. So, the passage of both of these are very dependent upon each other. Now, what is the distribution of body fluids? In order to maintain the homeostasis of body fluids and their composition, we want to know how are body fluids distributed in the body. They are found in different compartments, and these compartments are not totally isolated, meaning that there is constant movement of water and electrolytes between these compartments. So you will find that about 63% of fluid is found inside of the cell, and we call that intracellular fluid, while the remaining 37% of fluid is found outside of the cell, and we call that extracellular fluid, meaning that the majority of the water is found, or majority of our body fluids are found inside of cells, while the less amount of body fluids are found outside. And again, about 37%, and we named that extracellular fluid. There is also a little bit of a difference between females and males when it comes to the amount of water by weight. So for example, the average adult female is about 52% of water by weight. Comparing that to males is about 63% water by weight. And that difference, although we can't really generalize this difference, but again, it's on average, it goes to the fact that females have more adipose tissue, which is basically fat cells, and fat cells are very low in water, while males have more muscle mass, and muscle mass or muscle cells are very high in their water content. Overall, we have about 40 liters of water, and that again is, the average adult. And all of that water has lots of electrolytes that are dissolved within that water. And we already talked about how the water is distributed among these two major compartments. So again, 63% of water is inside the cells, intracellular fluid, while the remaining 37% is extracellular fluid. Now, the fluid that is extracellular can be found in 4 different categories. The majority of that extracellular fluid is found in between the cells, and we call that interstitial fluid, followed by water that's in the plasma, in the blood vessels, so we call that plasma. And then the third in order would be water or fluids that are found in the lymphatic vessels, and we call that lymph. And then followed by fluid that is separated from the rest of the body by an epithelial layer, and we call that transcellular fluid. So for example, the synovial fluid that are found in synovial joints, or the aqueous and vitreous humors that are found inside of the eye. Another example would be the CSF that is circulating within the brain ventricles. Collectively, we call those transcellular fluid. Another example would be, for instance, the fluid that is found, for example, within the pleural cavity or within the pericardial cavity. All of these fluids are examples of transcellular fluids. So they basically have a sac made of an epithelial layer separating it from the rest of the body. Now, what is the composition of that body fluid? We obviously know that it is made mainly out of water, but there are electrolytes or salts that are dissolved in that water. So the extracellular fluid, these are the electrolytes that are found in there: sodium, chloride, calcium, and bicarbonate ions. And you want to know that the main extracellular cation is sodium, and the main extracellular anion is chloride. While if you look at the levels of the intracellular fluids, of the electrolytes in the intracellular fluids, you'll find that your main intracellular cation is potassium. And these are things that we should know from when we were discussing the action potential, for example, and the resting membrane potential. Remember, we said it is due to the differences in these ions, where we talked back then that the main intracellular cation was potassium and the main extracellular cation was sodium. Now, what about the movement of fluid between the compartments? And that goes back to the process that this is a very dynamic thing going on in the body, that these fluids and electrolytes are not just found in compartments and stay there forever. They move around between these compartments due to changes in pressure. And the pressures that are involved in the process are two pressures, and they move things in the opposite direction. So there is the hydrostatic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure is the pressure that is there due to the movement of water molecules. So whenever you have something that is made out of water and moving, that will give hydrostatic pressure. So for example, as plasma is moving in the capillary wall, it is exerting hydrostatic pressure and filtering things out of the capillary wall into the interstitial fluid. So hydrostatic pressure, again, is due to the movement of water, and it pushes things away from the compartment. When you compare that to the osmotic pressure is due to substances that are dissolved within the fluid. For example, when you dissolve plasma proteins in fluid, or if you dissolve salts in fluid, an osmotic pressure is a pressure that is going to pull things towards the compartment. So for example, you can see here in plasma on the other end towards the venous end, where now the hydrostatic pressure goes down, but due to the plasma proteins that are too big and those remain inside of the capillaries, there is osmotic pressure that is exerted and will pull water from the interstitial tissue towards the capillaries. So again, you have hydrostatic pressure that filters things out and osmotic pressure that pulls things back into these different compartments. Now, next tutorial, we'll discuss water balance.